Breaking news on RT, the Taliban bomb a US airbase in the Afghan city of Bagram. At least 4 people have been killed and 14 injured. Also this hour. Tear gas is used against anti-Trump protesters in Portland for a second night in a row as demonstrations continue across America. One of the groups actively spurring on the nationwide protests is funded by billionaire and Clinton-sympathiser George Soros. And therapy dogs are sent to Capitol Hill to help Democratic staffers cope with the shock of defeat. Hello, welcome you with RT International today. Thanks for being with us. And we're going to start this hour with breaking news too, because the Taliban says it was behind an explosion at a US airbase in the Afghan city of Bagram, which killed 4 people and injured over a dozen more. According to the local governor, it occurred near a dining facility. Well, the NATO-led Resolute Support Mission in Afghanistan has confirmed the number of casualties and that an explosive device was detonated. They did not specify the nationalities of the victims. The incident does come less than 48 hours after the Taliban attacked a German consulate in the city of Mazar-e-Sharif. 6 people were killed there and over 100 more were injured. A suicide bomber drove a car full of explosives into the consulate late on Thursday, causing massive damage to the building. Germany's foreign ministry, though, says that none of its employees were harmed. The Taliban claims it was revenge for US airstrikes that killed 32 civilians near the northern city of Kunduz. That happened last week and was conducted by Afghan forces with the support of NATO. A word of warning, you might find some of the upcoming footage distressing. OK, let's get some reaction now from Sekurang-kurangnya. He's a professor at the Jindal School of International Affairs and joins us now. Good afternoon to you. Thanks for coming on to RT. This is the sort of second incident we've seen in 48 hours. What are the chances of seeing more, do you think, in the coming days?
We are in November and the Afghan winter is slowly setting in. So usually there is a lull in the fighting once it starts snowing and the mountains are fully covered. So now is the time, I think, when the Taliban feels that they want to drive home an advantage that has been gaining over the course of the summer and keep pushing east, west, north, south. It's now become a nationwide emergency, and the state, as well as its foreign backers, the Americans, the NATO forces, are unable to repel this Taliban surge, and therefore we are seeing these kind of daring attacks. Bagram is the heart of the American military establishment in Afghanistan and the war that has gone on for so many years, for 13 years, for 15 years now. So I think they have formally called off combat. They say they're only in advise and assist roles. But the point is the presence of around 10,000 American forces and much smaller but still significant German forces in the north, in Mazar-e-Sharif, in Kunduz. All these are, like red rags to the bull for the Taliban, because they would want to prove the point that these foreigners have a puppet regime in Kabul, which in any way is broken up with the internal infighting between the CEO and the president and the vice president, who has threatened to have a rebellion against the state. So unfortunately, the political instability is continuing, and there's a lack of governance. The population is distraught, and that's how Taliban are making inroads and advances like this.
Sekurang, I just want to play you now what President Obama said during his address to the troops at that very airbase that was bombed just today. He was making this speech 2 years ago. Let's listen to what he said then.
We said that we were going to reverse the Taliban's momentum. And so you went on the offensive, driving the Taliban out of its strongholds. Look, everybody knows Afghanistan's still a very dangerous place. Insurgents still launch cowardly attacks against innocent civilians. But just look at the progress that you've made possible. That's your legacy. That's what you did.
He's talked a lot there about progress. I mean, he admitted, didn't he, 2 years ago, that it's still a very dangerous place. But, I mean, in your opinion, has such progress been made?
Well, the state has stood up. I mean, it's there. It's not collapsed. But that is like a saving grace. You know, it's not progress. It is taking a beating every day and losing territory inch by inch to the insurgents. The state has also been buffeted by Pakistan-sponsored attacks of the Haqqani network, which are closely integrated with the Taliban. And I think the legacy that President Obama, unfortunately, is leaving, contrary to what he claimed at Bagram, as we just played, is of the failure to rein in Pakistan. Because Pakistan is so-called non-NATO ally of, major non-NATO ally of the United States. But Pakistan has had a hand in stoking this insurgency at every stage. And they don't want a peace negotiation or a settlement except on their own terms and through their proxies, which is the Taliban. So everybody in Afghanistan is aghast as to how the Obama administration, on one hand, is fighting Taliban, but on the other hand, has a so-called major non-NATO ally called Pakistan, which is the cause of the trouble, largely. There have been some splits within the Taliban also, some of whom, recently there was a Syed Tayyab Agha, a very senior Taliban leader, who came out saying, we should sever our ties with Pakistan. We are losing our credibility in the eyes of the Afghan people as a puppet of the Pakistanis. And yet, the Taliban faction that is controlled by Pakistan continues to cause this mayhem. And so there is a deep contradiction here. Washington, at least under President Trump, one would hope, would go after Pakistan and rein in their tendencies to destabilize Afghanistan. I think that's been, unfortunately, the major legacy failure of Obama administration. They should have been harsher with Pakistan, and that was one way they could have actually controlled this insurgency from becoming so devastating.
OK, Sekurang, thanks for your thoughts. We'll leave it there. That was Sekurang Chowlia, a professor at the Jindal School of International Affairs in New Delhi there. Thank you. Now, in other news, police have used tear gas and flash grenades to disperse crowds in Portland and Oregon as protests against President-elect Donald Trump continue. Well, demonstrations are escalated into riots in Portland on Thursday night too, as protesters smashed cars and shop fronts. Police said dangerous and criminal behaviour led them to redefine the rallies there as riots. And as you can see, looking at this map, there are plenty of protests taking place in dozens of cities across America. In New York, they have focused around the Trump Tower. Most have been peaceful, but there have been some arrests there. Further down in Florida and Miami, people have blocked a highway there, and police are currently trying to remove them. And then in Washington, a tunnel has been blocked with people chanting anti-Trump slogans. So these are the latest pictures then from the Capitol, but plenty's been happening too on the West Coast and from California. Caleb Moppin sent this report.
So once again, the sun is down, and here in Oakland, the streets are filled with protesters denouncing Donald Trump, the president-elect, who recently won the vote. You know, some people that are watching this protest at home right now, right? They might be like, well, look, Trump won the election fair and square. Why are they protesting? Are they against democracy? What would you say to that person?
We're just doing what's right. This is what we need. We don't need Trump in office. He's just going to make everything worse. It's as simple as that.
So do you think, is there a way of preventing him from taking office?
We can all fight, do this every single day if we have to make sure that he's gone.
Trump, he did win according to the U.S. Constitution, so you're saying you're protesting against the American democratic system, right?
So did Hitler. That doesn't mean we have to accept the way this as it is. We need to fight back against this fascist system.
To have democracy, you have to have an educated public. And the public schools have been progressively defunded both by Republicans and Democrats. And so the system as it is isn't promoting the democracy we have in our Constitution.
So the crowd of protesters has marched all the way up toward the highway. And as you can see, right in front of me, there's a line of police with riot gear on, shields, clubs at their sides, to prevent the protesters from getting onto the highway. Now the protesters are turning around in face of this crowd of police with clubs who are blocking them from getting onto the highway, as they've done on previous evenings in the protests in the aftermath of Donald Trump's election.
There's a calabop in there. Well, apparently some people have been so shocked by the result of the election they have had to seek psychological help, and some Democratic staffers were so upset that so-called therapy dogs were brought into Capitol Hill. So, are they overreacting? Well, RT's Ed Schultz discussed this with media analyst Lionel.
Since election night, the media has been covering violent anti-Trump protests across the nation, although many people have found more peaceful ways to cope with their disappointment. Some school districts and universities are offering counseling services to students who feel marginalized by Trump's rhetoric. Students at Cornell University staged a cry-in. The University of Kansas reminded students therapy dogs are available. A small elementary and middle school in Brooklyn held a community speak out with free hugs, healthy snacks, and poetry. Joining me for more on this, let's go to media analyst Lionel. You know what? What kind of kids are we? What kind of? When I was growing up, you know what we talked about at the dinner table watching Walter Cronkite? We talked about the Vietnam War. I mean, isn't this an issue of parenting? Explaining to your kids that life isn't perfect and sometimes there's going to be disappointments? I said on our election coverage on Tuesday night, the world's not going to come to an end.
Ed, I've got news for these kids. This isn't a coup. Imagine somebody from another planet who says, who are those Earthlings? What are they doing? They're turning over cars. Why? They won a championship. And what about those kids over there? They're beating the hell out of other people for exercising their franchise. It's called democracy.
Look, I understand that they're against Trump's agenda. There's no room for violence in any of this. But to the point where you need counseling and you have to hug kids and make them realize, I mean, what kind of world do they think this is?
Don't you remember when the conservatives were crying after Obama was elected twice? Oh, wait a minute, they didn't do that, yeah. And don't you remember when America's democracy and republic was held in abeyance, when we had to do the Supreme Court vote, when we didn't even know who won? Oh, that's right, we didn't. Don't you remember? No, there has been no other time. Ed, this is a mass hysteria fueled by social media, fueled by us, and I hope, and let me make sure I'm very clear about this. This is mocking derision, but it's fueled, and what happens is you give kids the idea that somehow this is okay.
Well, one of the groups involved in the anti-Trump protests is called Move On. Its website does call for people to rally against the president-elect, and it apparently has ties to billionaire investor and Clinton-sympathiser George Soros. Well, that's according to emails dating back to 2008, released by WikiLeaks from Clinton's campaign chairman, John Podesta, to George Soros. They gave tips on how to steer American voters, for example, financing groups operating at campaign rallies. Move On was among them. Yan Chikian has more.
Outraged by Donald Trump's victory in the presidential election, tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets across the U.S. to protest. Many demonstrators are refusing to accept Trump's victory. It looks like advocacy groups played a hand in organizing the seemingly spontaneous protests. Among them, an organization called Move On, which is funded by George Soros, a Hillary Clinton supporter and billionaire. The day after Trump was elected, the group sent out a press release saying,
"Within 2 hours of the call to action, Move On members had created more than 200 gatherings nationwide, with the number continuing to grow on Wednesday afternoon."
The presidential campaign showed there is no love lost between Donald Trump and George Soros, who was one of Hillary Clinton's top donors.
You are in a position where you're being attacked by Move On and these other very well organized radical left groups. You know it, your security knows it, Secret Service knows it. That's going to continue. Do you have a plan on how you're going to handle that?
Well, it is going to continue because the last person they want to face, the Democrats want to face, is me, and the last person Hillary Clinton wants to face is me.
That was during the election campaign, but apparently Trump's victory in the election didn't stop the Soros organization from campaigning against him.
Those who are stirring it up, and they do, many of them work for George Soros's front organizations, are really telling those innocent protesters and perhaps less innocent protesters that they're in danger, that they're endangered by Trump, even though Trump has done nothing but preach unity since he actually won the elections. In essence, what the opponents of Trump now are doing is exactly what they accused him of planning to do if he lost, which is disputing the results of an entirely fair election. It's an election where they've had all the media power and more of the money, and yet they've lost to him and to the voice of those ordinary people in the American shires who are normally ignored and forgotten.
George Soros is known for stirring up anti-government protests in other countries, and it looks like the upcoming Trump administration might see a few. The Soros organization went beyond protesting. Move On released a petition calling to change the U.S. Constitution and get rid of the Electoral College, which gave Trump his victory.
There are now some apparently well-funded attempts to undermine Trump's victory in the election. The irony is that many Clinton backers who are now slamming America's electoral system were praising it and scolding anyone who criticized it just days before the vote. In Washington, I'm Ganesh Chakya, RT.
Well, other countries too have elected leaders that have sparked protest, although their democratic systems have not always been respected by the US. Here's RT's Miguel Francis Santiago.
Democracy, arguably one of the most used and abused words. But it's more than that. It's a principle. So surely there's a gold standard.
Our brand of democracy is hard. I believe in American exceptionalism with every fiber of my being.
This idea is rooted deep in the American mentality. We're so proud of it, we signed it into law with the Advanced Democracy Act. Yet it's still not enough. We Americans want every country in the world to be as perfect and fair as we are. So we spread these democratic values abroad.
We would never have defeated communism or pulled down the Berlin Wall from both sides. We would never have placed before the world an example in action that has helped to triple the number of democracies over the last quarter century.
But this is what happens when we ignore a democratically elected president. Don't like your guy? Then sort out some regime change.
Assad has to go.
It's time for Assad to get out of the way.
The future of Syria can't include Assad.
Political transition to a new government without Bashar Assad.
And let all hell break loose. But sooner or later, that boomerang is going to come back and hit you. Isn't that right, America?
The liberal media so upset, visibly upset, about Donald Trump's victory.
You're awake, by the way. You're not having a terrible, terrible dream. Also, you're not dead and you haven't gone to hell. This is your life now. This is our election now. This is us. This is our country. It's real.
I'm hearing about a nightmare. It's hard to be a parent tonight for a lot of us.
So would you put money on seeing a revolution and regime change here in the United States? After all, one of the essences of democracy is freedom of choice. As Henry Ford once said, any customer can have a car painted any color that he wants so long as it is black. So long as the face fits, that is. I'm Miguel Francis Santiago.
Well, the protests against Donald Trump are not entirely limited to marches and riots. When a major shoe company endorsed the Republican, many were outraged by the decision. Consumers have begun posting videos and photos on social media of them either burning or discarding their New Balance shoes. Many say that they will never buy them again and that the company should be ashamed of showing support for Donald Trump. Election results only surprised those who were out of touch with the American people, though. That is the view of historian Stephen Cohen, who expressed that with Sophie and Co.
I would say that all these people who told you that Trump had no chance didn't know the America they lived in. And the reason is that the media, the opinion makers, live in New York and Washington, which is not the United States. I come from Kentucky. and Indiana, what you would call the provinces. And I knew from my friends and family down there that a lot of them were going to vote for Donald Trump. So it was only a question of a couple electoral states that they weren't sure he could get, and he got them. But a large part of the country was against Mrs. Clinton. What we don't know yet is whether this was primarily a vote for Trump or primarily a vote against Mrs. Clinton.
We're going to take a quick break now, but when we come back, we'll hear about medical practices in the US military that some believe have severely harmed many soldiers.
Now we have a variable, Donald Trump, and there is indeed a small but real probability that Americans will consider a precision attack against North Korean missile and nuclear facilities, especially when North Koreans develop missiles capable of striking the continental United States. And this is likely to happen within the next few years.
Most people think to stand out in this business, you need to be the first one on top of the story, or the person with the loudest voice, or the biggest ratings. In truth, to stand out in the news business, you just need to ask the right questions and demand the right answers. Question more.
Hello again. Now, this is a picture of a Swedish firefighter who suffered severe burns to his face, although it was removed from Facebook after his friend posted it there as a 60th birthday greeting. Lasse Gustafsson was 24, working in his first week as a firefighter when he was left badly disfigured in a gas explosion. It was 2 years before he was well enough to return to work. Well, after Facebook deleted the photograph for a second time, the friend launched a battle against what he called the social network's disgusting policy. We spoke to Lasse about what happened.
I'm also active in a group in Facebook called Burning Spirit, and in this group there are people with burns as myself, and I know that for 1 year ago a member of this group, she had her photos of her hands deleted. I was not totally surprised of this, but I think, of course, it's not democracy. For me, it's not no big deal. But I think if you have burns and you don't have it for so long time, and then if you take a step and you put up a picture on you and your burns on Facebook, and if Facebook then take it away, I think that can hurt the person.
We did get in touch with Facebook, and they said that the post was removed in error and have apologised to Lasse, although this isn't the first time Facebook has found itself in trouble after deleting posts. One of the most famous pictures censored by the network is Napalm Girl, deleted for breaking Facebook's restrictions on nudity. A photo of the iconic Little Mermaid statue also came under fire for showing too much bare skin. Less than a month ago, the social media site had to apologise too for removing a clip that showed how to detect cancer. Now, Italian Muslims say they will pray at St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican if officials continue to shut down mosques in Rome. That was reported after protests were held in the country's capital on Friday against the closure of a 6th mosque in just a few months. There are almost 2 million Muslims in Italy, making Islam the second biggest religion there, although there are only 8 official mosques. Because of that, many pray in so-called garage mosques. They are being closed, though, by Italian authorities who say they don't meet safety standards. Well, we spoke to Imam Sami Salam about the issue, and he says that the clampdown is unexpected because many of the mosques have been around for decades.
At the moment, officials have decided to shut down several small Islamic centres in Rome. They've closed them on the grounds that they function outside the country's legal system. This will definitely create further problems for Muslims in Italy. In Rome and its suburbs, they've already closed 6 mosques. Such decisions puzzle us, as the majority of these mosques have existed for at least 20 years here, and the building's legal status or violation of law were not questioned before. Now we'll probably have to pray outside, as we did before while praying near the Colosseum. But all this was strictly within the law. But we shouldn't play that card by praying in the Vatican.
We also got the opinions of people in Rome, and most of them did say that they believe freedom of worship is important.
I don't think it's right to shut down a place of worship, be it Christian or Muslim.
If Muslim citizens don't have the opportunity to have a place of worship, then they have a right to protest in the Vatican.
If Muslims pray in front of the Vatican and protest, I think they'll do well. Freedom of worship is important. I don't understand why it's necessary to close the mosques.
Closing mosques is wrong. I believe that rights should be equal for all. I believe the Muslim protest in the Vatican is right.
You're watching RT International. It's good to have your company today. Up next, it's Going Underground with Afshin Ratansi. For those of you, though, watching us in the UK or Ireland, it's time for Sputnik.